The man was truly astonished. He encountered a dragon in the lowest level of the dungeon. As a mere bronze-level adventurer, he was swallowed whole. Miraculously, the protagonist did not die but transformed into a low-tier version of a Bone King. From then on, the protagonist, in his quest to return to a blissful human life, began to grind levels and evolve relentlessly. The story began 2.5 days ago when the protagonist was still a human-looking bronze-level adventurer. Though not strong, he was known for his reliability. Every morning, he would check the Adventurers Guild for commissions and, if none suited him, he would grind in the lowest-level Watermoon dungeon. Selling the magic cores and materials from monsters allowed him to cover his daily expenses and slowly save money. This routine had lasted for 10 years. It wasn't that the protagonist lacked ambition, his talent simply limited his options. Yet, he persisted for 10 years, dreaming of becoming a silver-ranked adventurer. Perhaps this was the perseverance of an ordinary person. However, fate had other plans for him today, as he discovered a hidden passage in the Watermoon dungeon. Familiar with the dungeon as if it were his own home, he was certain this was an unexplored area, which excited him immensely. A good find could yield valuable items, and even without any loot, reporting the information to the guild would earn a handsome reward. Normally, one should not venture alone into such unknown areas, but the protagonist's rash decision changed his life forever.
そんな愚か者だから竜と相対する羽目になった。
Although the creature before him bore no resemblance to a dragon, the protagonist immediately recognized it as such. It was his first encounter, yet the oppressive aura unmistakably proclaimed its status as the king of monsters. The next second, he was swallowed. Perhaps he was excreted, for only his bones remained, yet his consciousness and memories were intact. This new form was undoubtedly that of a lowly skeleton. It took him a full 2.5 minutes to accept this reality. By then, the dragon had vanished. The protagonist decided to leave the area. Soon, he encountered his own kind in the middle levels of the dungeon. He thought he could easily defeat them, but his new body was incapable of swordsmanship. Fortunately, his opponent also fell at that moment, watching it clumsily reassemble itself. The protagonist felt helpless. Then, he remembered he possessed other powers and immediately activated chi, sourced from his life force, temporarily enhancing his physical abilities.
気の力で市内力を高め
To his surprise, the defeated skeleton emitted a golden light, which then entered his body, replenishing the chi he had used. The protagonist recalled a friend, a mad scholar who studied monsters. She had mentioned that monsters possess incredible characteristics, allowing them to evolve over time and experience. This was the so-called existential evolution. There had been skeletons that evolved into ghouls. Although still not human, ghouls have flesh and are closer to humanity. Perhaps, after evolving, he could return to town disguised with a cloak and mask. Thus, the protagonist decided to continuously defeat monsters in the dungeon to undergo existential evolution.
今日も来ないのか。夕飯は自分で作るか。
On the other hand, the protagonist had already defeated the fifth skeleton and was getting used to his new body. Through the recovery effects of defeating monsters, he could use the power of chi in every battle. He planned to challenge stronger monsters next. Soon, he encountered a slime. Although classified as one of the weakest monsters alongside skeletons, slimes are difficult to defeat with physical attacks. The protagonist lacked attack magic, so defeating it required destroying its core. As he approached, the slime spat acid, which he dodged before striking it down and quickly retreating to guard against a counterattack. Unexpectedly, the slime dissolved into a puddle. The protagonist thought he was lucky to hit the core, not realizing his abilities had surpassed his human peak after absorbing experience points. He collected the magic core and the slime's liquid, which, despite its acidic attack, turned into the best skincare product for women after death. Selling for a good price, 2.5 days passed, and the protagonist found he had no need for sleep or food. Through experimentation, he discovered he could wield both magic and holy energy through his new body, especially the latter, which is lethal to the undead. Holy energy could heal, purify water, and delay food spoilage. He applied holy energy to bread, extending its freshness by 3 days, hoping to evolve into a ghoul that could eat. He then began planning for the future, realizing he could win against 1 or 2 monsters but would struggle against 3 and had to flee from 4 or more. He lamented his weakness, having trained and sought knowledge relentlessly for 10 years for his dream. In subsequent battles, the protagonist realized his strength had increased. Slimes, previously troublesome, were now easily defeated with a strike to their core. Finally, he met the conditions for existential evolution. On her first venture into the labyrinth, the girl nearly fell victim to a skeleton. Unexpectedly, her life was saved by a ghoul, which only intensified her fear, as ghouls are known to be stronger than skeletons. Unbeknownst to her, the ghoul was actually the male protagonist, who had mysteriously transformed into a monster after being devoured by a dragon. Just recently, the protagonist had evolved from a skeleton to a ghoul. By continuously defeating monsters and absorbing their experience, he could evolve into a creature more closely resembling a human. After defeating 2 goblins once again, he suddenly heard the sound of a human fighting with a sword, seemingly battling a monster. Although it wasn't the time to reveal himself, the protagonist decided to check it out and stealthily approached the source of the noise, hoping his true appearance wouldn't be seen. After all, interacting with humans was dangerous at this point. Soon, the protagonist saw a girl fighting a skeleton, but she seemed to be losing. Judging by the situation, the girl appeared to be a novice adventurer, yet he didn't recognize her. Despite being a weak adventurer, the protagonist was well-liked and had made significant contributions to the Adventurers Guild. This is why he had been able to work diligently as a bronze-level adventurer for 10 years without being asked to leave. When he came back to his senses, he continued to observe the girl. Seeing the girl cornered and in dire straits, the protagonist intervened. The skeleton was immediately distracted by the stronger presence behind it, but the girl, lacking experience, didn't seize the opportunity to strike. With no other choice, the protagonist attacked, enhancing his strike with chi and defeating the skeleton in one blow. He then attempted to communicate with the girl using his hoarse voice, but this only scared her more. She kept her guard up, pointing her sword at him. After the initial shock, she realized he was trying to speak. Listening to his raspy voice, she paused for a moment before understanding that he was an adventurer. Though she couldn't fathom why he had turned into a monster, she thanked him for saving her life, and then he asked her for a favor: to buy him clothes from the town so he could return. She quickly understood his wish to return to town and nodded in agreement to buy him a robe. He then threw her a large bag of gold coins and stepped back. Despite her fear, she approached to pick up the coins and introduced herself as Lena. As the daughter of a knightly family, she promised to repay his kindness. Upon reaching the labyrinth's exit, Lena remained cautious of him. Once they were a safe distance apart, she turned and left the labyrinth. The protagonist understood her caution. Any other adventurer encountering such an oddity would likely report it to the guild immediately. However, his intuition told him Lena wouldn't do that. If he was wrong, he'd deal with it later. 2.5 minutes later, Shuela from the Adventurers Guild stepped out and saw Lena approaching to inquire about a shop. Meanwhile, the protagonist was wreaking havoc within the labyrinth. Feeling the changes in his body, the protagonist realized his strength was now far greater than when he was human. Despite his intense training while alive, he had seen little improvement. Now, in this new form, he finally possessed the talent he had always desired. While lost in thought, Lena's call brought him back to reality. After confirming she wasn't another ghoul, she relaxed her guard. Noticing his speech had become more fluent, he explained that he had been practicing speaking for the past 2.5 days. Satisfied with the coat Lena had bought, he was very pleased with her choice. Moreover, she had also bought bandages and gloves, items he urgently needed. Her kindness nearly moved him to tears.
気配りのできる親切な子なんだ。
Though his current body lacked the ability to cry, he then dressed in the clothes she had prepared. Lena handed him a mirror, and seeing his reflection, he felt entering the town might still be a stretch, but Lena had already prepared for this. Pulling out a mask from her bag, surprised, he tried on the skull mask, which unexpectedly adhered to his face and couldn't be removed. Lena was stunned and then apologized. The mask, bought from a roadside stall and not a guild-recommended shop, seemed to have been cursed. She was visibly frightened, but he didn't complain. Instead, he tried to use holy energy to purify the mask. The mask trembled under the influence of the holy energy, but all his efforts couldn't lift the curse. Lena apologized again, but he reassured her, suggesting that he might be able to remove it once he became stronger or save enough money for a powerful cleric to do it. Relieved by his words, Lena suggested they head to town now. Upon reaching the city gate, he prepared to bid Lena farewell, fearing her association with him might jeopardize her adventurer status. However, Lena argued that having an adventurer companion might make entry easier and that she owed him her life. Thus, they approached the city gate together, presenting their passes. The guards were vigilant, especially because of his suspicious mask. Lena cleverly explained that the mask was cursed and couldn't be removed, and his unclear speech was due to injuries from fighting monsters, demonstrating to the guards that the mask indeed couldn't be removed. They were allowed into the town without further issues, but when Lena looked back, she found he had disappeared. He had his reasons. Her kindness could inadvertently involve her in his troubles. It was better to leave proactively and repay her kindness once he became more human-like. He then turned and left. That evening, he arrived at a small house, finding no response to his knock. Entering, he found himself in the home of his most trusted friend, a woman named Narelno. The woman was truly astounded. She could never have imagined that the man she secretly admired had transformed into the appearance of a ghoul. As a scholar specializing in monster research, she had never encountered the legendary dragon. The idea that the protagonist could be swallowed by a dragon and then turn into an undead was beyond bizarre. Yet, she was certain that the person before her was indeed the protagonist. Learning that he still wished to continue as an adventurer, Roland didn't hesitate to offer her help. Given his current appearance, he was no longer suitable for staying at inns, so she let him stay at her house. In exchange, she would take some of his bodily samples for research. She claimed this was her intention, but in reality, she also sought a way to turn him back into a human. The next day, Roland returned from the Adventurers Guild, having exchanged the protagonist's loot for gold coins. With money in hand, the protagonist immediately headed to the weapon shop. As his weapon had been damaged in previous battles, the weapon shop owner was taken aback upon seeing him. Despite being fully cloaked, there was something familiar about him. After inspecting his weapon, she quickly realized that the man could use magic, holy energy, and chi. They had only ever had one customer like that before. The protagonist, when he was human, crafting a weapon that accommodated all three attributes would take time, and her husband, the craftsman, was very particular. He would need to consult with the protagonist several times during the process. The protagonist assured her it was no issue and that she could contact Scholar Roland for communication. When the shop owner heard this, she suspected something. Meanwhile, Roland was engrossed in her monster research. Although the protagonist had managed to existentially evolve from a skeleton to a ghoul, true monsters capable of evolution were incredibly rare. The protagonist's current state was exceptionally unique. Despite his transformation, Roland was immediately sure it was him upon their first encounter. They had known each other for nearly 10 years. Having met on a mission when they were younger, the protagonist's extensive knowledge of adventuring had captivated her. Since then, he had strived to become a God Silver level adventurer while she pursued her research, always keeping an eye on his progress. On the other side, the protagonist had already made a contract with the weapon shop owner. Until the new weapon was forged, they provided him with a spare weapon that allowed him to temporarily use chi and magic. After settling everything, the protagonist hurriedly left, leaving them pondering his departure. The shop owner couldn't understand why he wouldn't rely on them, especially since they had already figured out his identity. Her husband thought the protagonist was cursed and hid his identity to avoid involving them, but by leaving Roland's contact information, he hinted at his true identity. By evening, the protagonist had prepared dinner for Roland, reviving their old routine. During his human days, he would take care of all household chores in exchange for learning various knowledge from Roland. She asked about his goals, and he expressed his desire to keep evolving until he could live a normal life with a human appearance. The next day, the protagonist went to the Watermoon Labyrinth to grind monsters. There, he encountered a middle-aged man who was clearly a novice. The kind-hearted protagonist couldn't stand by and help defeat a slime. However, he didn't explain much and left. The labyrinth's monsters were dangerous, but there were also humans who pretended to be weak to ambush and rob others. The man caught up with the protagonist, revealing he was just an ordinary chef facing financial troubles. He needed to gather 15 gold coins within a week, prompting his risky venture into the labyrinth. The protagonist didn't want to meddle, but then remembered the hidden area where he encountered the dragon. Since he was no longer suited for the guild, he needed someone to help map the area and report it to the guild. So, he asked the man to follow him, to the latter's delight. Observing the man's wounds, the protagonist felt an instinctive craving for flesh, unaware that this was a sign of his impending existential evolution. Afterward, he took the man to explore the space where the dragon had been. There, the man discovered a narrow passage that the protagonist had never explored. At the end, they found an empty room. As the protagonist entered, he saw a red teleportation circle light up on the floor, invisible to the man. Stepping into it, they were transported to an unknown area, likely a deeper layer with powerful monsters. Despite the danger, the protagonist couldn't abandon the man and stepped into the teleportation circle without hesitation, only to find the man already downed upon arrival. The woman was truly exasperated. The man she had secretly loved for years suddenly embraced her. She thought this straightforward man had finally seen the light. However, she never expected him to truly unleash his beastly nature. It turned out that the protagonist could no longer suppress his ghoul instincts. When he lost control and saw Lorraine for the first time, all he could think about was how delicious she must be. The cause of all this was the protagonist's latest evolution, which made him unable to control his desire to devour flesh and blood. Not long ago, the protagonist encountered a bone giant in the Watermoon Labyrinth. To protect the unconscious chef uncle, he faced this terrifying entity alone. This encounter would soon become the catalyst for his evolution. From his ineffective initial attack, the protagonist deduced that she had no effect on the bone giant. He then attempted to use magic to attack, but to no avail. With the exit's teleportation circle gone, The bone giant was clearly the boss of this room, and it seemed impossible to leave without defeating it. What made matters worse was his need to protect the chef uncle during the fight. Yet, he persisted, embodying the spirit of an adventurer, a lesson taught by someone he admired. In the next moment, he unleashed holy energy, a force too great for his backup weapon to handle. As expected, holy energy inflicted damage on the undead, breaking the bone giant's leg. Seizing the opportunity, the protagonist delivered the final blow. When the chef uncle awoke, he found the protagonist healing himself with holy energy. Before the protagonist could explain, the uncle was shocked by the sight of the shattered remains of the bone giant. Then, he saw the protagonist extracting a massive magic stone. Just one look at the stone size made the uncle realize how powerful the bone giant had been. Even more astonishing was the protagonist's offer to give him the magic stone, asking only for help with errands at the guild and lifetime free meals at the restaurant in return. Such simple conditions were readily accepted by the uncle, who was actually helping himself. Tears fell from the uncle's eyes as he thought of this. Upon returning to town, the uncle explained everything to his wife, introducing the protagonist as his savior. The couple expressed their heartfelt thanks to the protagonist, welcoming him for meals anytime. Unbeknownst to them, their actions had saved the protagonist's life. After defeating the bone giant, his thoughts began to slip out of control, his subconscious increasingly craving flesh and blood. If the uncle had been deceitful, the protagonist's last shred of sanity would have completely unraveled. His consciousness blurring, the protagonist returned to Lorraine's cottage.
レント、一体何を。なんだ、レント。レント、お前。
Coming to his senses, Lorraine kicked him away and tried calling his name, hoping to awaken his consciousness. Fortunately, the protagonist regained some awareness and stopped. Seeing this, Lorraine decided to knock him down. When the protagonist regained consciousness again, he was puzzled about his presence in the cottage. Seeing Lorraine, he immediately remembered what had happened and apologized. Lorraine was more concerned about what the protagonist had gone through than his apology. After explaining everything, the protagonist offered to check her wounds. Seeing that Lorraine's injuries were only superficially treated, he felt even more guilty and hurriedly used holy energy to heal her. Noticing more bite marks on her shoulder, he activated holy energy again. Lorraine then noticed something and asked him to remove his shirt, revealing his now stronger body. Unbeknownst to him, he had evolved again. When he tried to see if his face had changed, he found his mask's shape completely altered, worrying about exposing his identity. However, the mask changed again, adapting to his wishes. Lorraine speculated that they might be able to remove the mask, but they couldn't. The protagonist needed to cover his face anyway, so it wasn't a significant issue. Lorraine also noticed that the protagonist's speech had become much smoother, possibly another effect of his evolution. But unlike previous evolutions, which were instantaneous, this one was delayed. Lorraine guessed that consuming her flesh and blood might have met a condition necessary for evolution, turning him into a ghoul, a type of vampire. The protagonist didn't understand why he became a ghoul, but Lorraine suggested that monsters might evolve in the direction they desire. Since the protagonist wished to return to a human form, she believed he could potentially evolve into a vampire, but this evolution might require meeting specific conditions beyond defeating monsters. The next day, the protagonist looked at his damaged backup weapon, anticipating the weapon shop owner's complaints. He explained his encounter with the bone giant in an undiscovered area. The owner had already recognized the protagonist's true identity, but they never openly discussed it. The owner then provided a better backup weapon, and the protagonist set off for the labyrinth again. The woman was truly at her wit's end. The first time she cooked, she prepared a bowl of poison for the man she had secretly loved for years. Yet, knowing full well it was poison, the man drank it without hesitation. This was because his body had transformed into that of a monster. Ever since the protagonist evolved into a ghoul, indeed, poisons had no effect on him. However, for some reason, healing potions and elixirs still worked on him. Moreover, the ghoul's body didn't require sleep. The only thing that troubled the protagonist was the occasional hunger he felt, a craving for flesh he deeply loathed. While the protagonist was pondering, Lorraine handed him a small bottle. His first thought was that it was poison again. Unexpectedly, it was blood that Lorraine had prepared especially for him. Knowing his strong aversion to flesh, this small bottle was all he needed to suppress his hunger. Next, The protagonist planned to head to the guild since taking on commissions was the only way to advance. Hearing this, Lorraine disagreed with his plan, pointing out that presenting an adventurer's license would surely cause a commotion. Given his former influence, this left the protagonist puzzled, wondering how a bronze-level adventurer like himself could wield any influence. Seeing his naive appearance, Lorraine sighed and explained that although he was just a bronze-level adventurer, his contributions over the past 10 years were significant, from assisting newcomers to handling troublesome commissions. The Adventurers Guild had taken note. They had even considered inviting him to work at the guild, but seeing no signs of him wanting to retire, they never broached the subject. However, upon learning this, the protagonist had no intention of retiring, as his dream was to become a mithril-level adventurer. After some thought, Lorraine suggested that the protagonist rejoin the guild under a new identity. He agreed to this approach and thus arrived at the Adventurers Guild. What he didn't expect was that shortly after rejoining the guild, he would encounter someone with the strength of a dragon. Before this, he registered with an old acquaintance, Shella. Feeling nostalgic as the last time he filled out a registration form was 10 years ago. After so many experiences, he was starting anew. Shella was shocked upon reading the form. The protagonist had registered under the name Lente but changed his surname to Lorraine's, Vivi. This reminded Shella of the missing protagonist. After receiving his iron-level adventurer's proof, the protagonist once again ventured into the Watermoon Labyrinth. He was drawn by the sound of a fight ahead and found two novice adventurers battling goblins. Judging that they could handle themselves at this level, he turned to leave. Previously, he would have approached newcomers to guide them, but now, with his current appearance, he avoided contact unless someone was in dire need of help. His goal in visiting the Watermoon Labyrinth was to explore an unknown area beyond the Bone Giant's room and report it to the guild for a significant contribution. Upon stepping through the teleportation circle, he didn't encounter the strong enemy he expected but was transported to a dusty room. Lifting the curtain, he found only a skeleton on the bed.
そこで何をしているのですか？もう一度聞きますね。あなたはそこで。
まずい。こいつはやばいやつだ。
The woman's aura was as formidable as the dragon the protagonist had encountered initially. Hearing the protagonist mention looking for items, the woman immediately branded him a thief, stating that thieves should be prepared to die at any moment. She couldn't forgive the disturbance of her space. Without allowing the protagonist to explain, she launched an attack. The protagonist was sent flying but didn't die. Instead, his clothes were burned off. The mysterious woman was about to deliver a finishing blow when she saw his monstrous body and ceased her attack. Guessing why he could come here without explaining further, she admitted her mistake and apologized. Continuing to talk as if nothing had happened, she mentioned burning his clothes and offered her cloak as compensation, asking him to keep this place a secret. In return for his silence, she handed him a map, a magical device that automatically records the explored areas of the labyrinth for its holder. Believing their transaction complete, she teleported the protagonist to the labyrinth's exit. 2.5 minutes later, the protagonist returned to the cottage. Lorraine couldn't help but tease that perhaps he was cursed, always encountering bizarre situations. They then examined the magical device given by the mysterious woman. Lorraine confirmed it wasn't cursed, but it didn't react to her magic. However, when the protagonist infused it with his magic, the device displayed a detailed map of the Watermoon Labyrinth, including moving icons with names, likely the two novice adventurers he had encountered earlier. Lorraine was astounded, declaring the map's capabilities as national treasure level. They continued to experiment with the map, discovering its extensive features and confirming its value. Besides the magical device, the protagonist asked Lorraine to examine the cloak given by the mysterious woman. A brief inspection revealed it to be of high quality, with excellent magical resistance and imperviousness to ordinary blades, offering more protection than standard armor. As for the mysterious woman, they had little information, only knowing her strength exceeded that of a gold-level adventurer. The next day, the protagonist returned to the Watermoon Labyrinth. Since encountering the dragon there, his fate had changed dramatically. Swallowed whole and transformed into a monster, he considered this part of the adventure he longed for as a mithril-level adventurer. He planned to find the woman again, hoping she might know why he became a monster. However, upon reaching the entrance, the teleportation circle had already disappeared. During their squad's inaugural labyrinth assessment, while others eagerly dashed in, one man calmly called his two teammates to a halt. He first approached a shop and, under the puzzled gazes of his companions, purchased a labyrinth map. This move left the two novices bewildered, given that the Adventurers Guild already provided maps for such missions. However, after the man prompted them to compare the two, they realized the guild's map was a 15-year-old outdated version. The new map offered more detailed guidance and even marked the locations of traps. The man had teamed up with the two for a guild promotion test aimed at advancing to a bronze-level adventurer. Unbeknownst to them, before his transformation into a monster, he had already been among the most seasoned bronze-level adventurers. To him, the guild's promotion test was a mere formality. Thus, this veteran adventurer effortlessly led the two novices through the beginner's village. Before the test, the man had already met his teammates. Les was a swordsman, skilled in enhancing his combat abilities with chi, while Laura was a magician proficient in offensive and healing magic. By chance, the guild had grouped them into the same team. The test's objective was to reach a designated location within the New Moon Labyrinth by sunset, with the examiner emphasizing the absence of any rules. Participants were free to do as they wished, with the earliest team to arrive receiving extra points. Shortly after entering the labyrinth, they encountered a horde of skeleton warriors. Laura immediately used magic to amplify their strength. The man, however, did not exert his full strength, opting instead to give the novices a chance to gain experience. Despite their youth, they demonstrated significant competence, managing basic teamwork and energy distribution effectively. After the man dispatched the last skeleton warrior, the trio sensed something amiss, as such a large number of monsters was unusual for the labyrinth's first floor. Indeed, they found incense used to lure monsters, clearly intentionally placed. The man warned his teammates that their real foes lay ahead, and they were not monsters but humans, shocking the novices.
あと2人いる。前衛は俺だっつったろ。そうだったな。ここは待てる。すげえ。助かったぜ。ローラ、お返しだ。
After triumphing in the ensuing battle, they tied up the attackers. The man then imparted a lesson: anything could happen within the labyrinth, and adventurers must always be on guard, not just against monsters. Les, now fully convinced of the man's expertise, vowed to follow his lead from then on. As they left, the man deliberately stayed behind.
早く回収してやれ。気づいてたのか。
It turned out the attackers were guild staff, and the guild president had summoned Zila, expressing suspicion that the man might be a fugitive. He instructed Zila to keep a close watch and report any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, the man and his team reached a door leading to one of the labyrinth's boss halls, also the path to their mission objective. The novices, lacking experience in boss battles, understandably became nervous. The man reassured them that for adventurers, avoiding unwinnable battles was not shameful. They could decide whether to proceed. At that moment, another team arrived at the boss hall, ridiculing the man's team and harassing Laura. Les immediately protected her. Sensing the man was not to be trifled with, the other team accepted his offer to let them enter the boss hall first while his team rested outside. Despite their mockery, the man's team allowed them to proceed. Les was confused by the man's strategy, fearing it meant losing the test. Laura, however, sensed the man had a plan. As expected, within minutes, screams echoed from the hall, and guild staff rescued the other team, demonstrating the man's intention to teach his teammates that failure in the test did not equate to death. Under the guidance of the man, the team ventured into the boss room, only to encounter a slime king, a daunting challenge for rookie adventurers. The previous group of 4 challengers had been swiftly rescued by guild staff, unable to withstand even 2.5 seconds against the creature. However, this team had a strategy in place. Les, the swordsman, would draw the boss's attention, while Laura, the magician, prepared a potent fire spell for a decisive blow. The man, meanwhile, stayed alert to any additional threats, hoping to provide the novices with valuable battle experience. Observing their progress, he was confident in their ability to defeat the Slime King.
レントさん、ライズを助けてあげて。私は大丈夫ですから。行きます。グランプラクセ。
Laura's Laura's spell quickly dispatched the Slime King, and before it could regenerate, Les delivered the final strike to its core. Post-battle, the man casually collected the valuable slime droplets, knowing they could fetch a good price, even split 3 ways. Each member could earn a silver coin. While they were gathering the slime, another team of adventurers dashed towards the finish line. Les panicked, but the man and Laura remained composed. Suddenly, a poison fog appeared, incapacitating the team that had rushed ahead. It was revealed that this was all part of the guild's test, designed to catch adventurers off guard at the last moment. Les was initially frustrated, but Laura explained that speed wasn't the sole criterion for passing the promotion test. The guild had never stated such a requirement. It was an oversight by many novice adventurers. The experienced man had anticipated the guild's penchant for mischief. He taught Les that the essence of being an adventurer was simply to fulfill the commission. His reluctance to disclose this earlier aimed to encourage independent thinking during missions. Upon reaching the endpoint, the guild staff awarded them badges, which would officially promote them to bronze-level adventurers once presented at the guild counter. As the first team to arrive, they also received healing potions, much to Les' delight. Before departing, the man suggested exploring another area, leading them to a staircase descending to the labyrinth's second level. Les recognized it as the entrance to an unexplored floor. The man commented that labyrinths were beyond human comprehension, something they would soon experience firsthand. Upon entering the second level, they were astonished to find an entire forest underground, complete with sunlight, a sight that left them in awe despite having heard about the varying appearances of each labyrinth level. When the trio returned to the guild, they encountered numerous traps and ambushes, just as the man had predicted, underscoring the guild's harsh nature. After handing over their badges to Zila, they officially became bronze-level adventurers. It was then that Laura and Zila learned that guild staff had been monitoring them throughout the test to assess their character, as mere task completion wasn't enough for promotion. Subsequently, the man parted ways with the two, but Zila stopped him for a private conversation, not as a guild inquiry but out of personal concern. Despite not reporting his identity to the guild's higher-ups, the man remained guarded, fearing that revealing his monster identity might compel Zila to report him for safety reasons. Prepared for this, Zila presented a magic contract to keep his identity secret, risking becoming his slave if she breached it. Touched by her determination to assist him as a friend, and acknowledging her past help during his human days, the man decided to trust Zila, revealing his undead identity.
恐ろしい。やっぱり知らない方が良かったんじゃないか。
Zila's acceptance of his true form reassured him, and she promised to help conceal his identity within the guild. The man then introduced Zila to Laura, causing a stir as Laura hadn't expected him to bring another girl home, especially one aware of his monster identity. Attempting to intimidate Zila, Laura mentioned the man's past loss of control, testing her trustworthiness. Zila's steadfast trust in the man earned Laura's approval, leading to a dinner invitation. After dinner, impressed by the man's culinary skills, Zila praised him, prompting Laura to boast about his all-around capabilities. Since his last uncontrollable incident, the man had been subsisting on blood provided by Laura to curb his predatory urges. Zila warned him about the guild's growing scrutiny due to his recent activities, noting the concerning disappearance of novice adventurers, suspected to be kidnappings rather than monster attacks. With suspicions potentially pointing towards him, the man decided to temporarily avoid the labyrinth. Heeding the advice of his friends, this man could never have anticipated the immense power that would result from merging all his strengths into a single technique. He began by channeling magic power into his longsword, then wrapped chi around his hands, and finally activated holy power within his body. The forceful fusion of these three disparate powers was only possible because he had become undead. Had he still been human, such a daring maneuver would likely have resulted in his body being torn apart by the conflicting forces. After unleashing a full-powered strike, even the longsword disintegrated into dust, and the targeted wooden post was so thoroughly obliterated that it spun in the air and landed as a perfect sphere on the ground. The man's purpose for venturing out the day was to retrieve a new weapon forged by the blacksmith. Laura was truly astounded by his actions, especially since he could have taken the opportunity to rest due to the kidnapping incident. Yet he chose to leave home early in the morning. Upon receiving the weapon capable of merging the three types of energy, he first tested its magic power, easily slicing a wooden post in half with a single strike. His next test involved chi, which, unlike the slashing attack, involved stabbing the post straight through, miraculously splitting it in two. The final test was with holy power, resulting in a sweeping strike that astonishingly caused new shoots to sprout from the cut section of the post. The blacksmith was amazed by the weapon's effects, especially since individuals capable of wielding all three powers are exceedingly rare. The man modestly explained that he originally only knew how to use magic power and chi. After whimsically helping to restore a neglected shrine, a deity granted him holy power, though he wasn't sure which deity it was, suspecting it might be a minor one. Next, the man decided to attempt a magic chi fusion technique, a high-level skill even among adventurers, fraught with danger due to the risk of catastrophic failure if the fusion went awry. The blacksmith, upon hearing this, promptly provided a spare weapon for the experiment, which proved to be challenging but ultimately successful, pulverizing another wooden post. After leaving the blacksmith shop, the man's attention was drawn by the noise in an alley, where a young boy was pleading with an adventurer to take on a commission not sanctioned by the guild. The adventurer, reluctant to accept and threatening violence, was dismissed by the man with a silver coin. Intrigued by the boy's urgent request, the boy hailed from Luai's village, a few days' journey east of the town, known for its tradition of offering sacrifices to the river god. Recently, the deity seemingly manifested, consuming a girl designated as a living sacrifice and subsequently demanding more offerings. The next victim was to be the boy's younger sister, prompting him to seek the man's help. The man accepted the commission, noting that rescuing the sister wouldn't necessarily entail battling the river god, though he sensed something amiss. Upon reaching Luai's village, they found it devoid of life due to the sacrificial tradition. The man's visit to the boy's home revealed marks indicating the river god's interest in the daughter. Despite the boy's desperation, his sister appeared optimistic, valuing the village's traditions over her individual desires. She even asked the man to abandon the commission, but he insisted only the boy could cancel it. Agreeing to stay temporarily, the man was forbidden from interfering with the ritual. The next day, while scouting the village, the man noticed a merchant caravan armed with weapons, an unusual sight given the area's safety. Disguised as a festival attendee, he learned from the merchants that the river god's disturbances made it an inopportune time for the festival, advising him to leave. However, as the ritual commenced, the man, acting as the boatman, protected the sister. Shortly after setting off, a dense fog enveloped them, and a giant sea creature emerged, believed to be the river god. The sister, holding a glowing orb and pleading for mercy, was interrupted by the man, who revealed the orb as merely a signal device. Jumping onto the lake's surface, thanks to a magical artifact provided by Laura, he confronted the creature.
主とやらの正体。クラーケンは普通海に出る魔物だ。炎も吐かない。昼間の変な野郎が。おとなしく引き上げてりゃ大事な命をなくさずに済んだのによ。やはりな、魔術師が幻影を霧に移しフォティアボリバスを放つ。湖の主が人相の悪い行商人とはな。
Ultimately, the villagers realized the river god was a fabrication by the merchants aiming to abduct people. The previously kidnapped girls were still in the village, and under the man's coercion, the merchants revealed their location, successfully concluding the commission. The sister's disappointment at the man's departure was palpable.
ありがとうございました。ああ、元気でな。
Upon his return, Laura, learning the full story and especially the sister's reward, could only lament the man's flirtatious nature.
This was an unusual adventure commission, with a reward of merely 1 copper coin. Unexpectedly, what seemed like a simple task to eliminate mutant rats escalated into a confrontation with a boss-level creature from the Draconid family. The guild occasionally accepted such pro bono commissions to foster goodwill between adventurers and the community, with the copper coin serving merely as a token gesture. Despite the modest reward, adventurers often willingly assisted the common folk. Given the man's recent restriction from leveling in the labyrinth, he accepted the task, unaware that it would lead to acquiring his first familiar creature. Upon arriving at the town's only orphanage, the man was surprised to find the commission issued by a teenage girl. Compared to her maturity, the other children at the orphanage were thrilled to see an adventurer, a rarity for them. The girl, named Ellie, quickly assumed a leadership role, calming them down. With the orphanage's none ill, Ellie had no choice but to act as the caretaker for the other orphans, while the commission ostensibly involved clearing mutant rats from the basement. Her real request was for the man to gather dragon's blood flowers to save the orphanage's head nun, a priestess whose body had accumulated too much malevolent energy due to her insufficiently powerful holy power. Understanding the situation, the man agreed to Ellie's request, surprised by his willingness to venture into the dangerous swamp where the dragon's blood flowers grew. Before embarking on that mission, he addressed the initial task of eliminating the mutant rats in the basement. Upon his intrusion, the mutant rats, significantly larger than ordinary ones, emerged to defend their territory, preparing to dispatch the rats with magic. The man was taken aback when the lead rat, demonstrating intelligence, charged at him after ordering its subordinates to flee. In an unexpected turn, the rat bit the man and, upon ingesting his blood, transformed, its fur turning gray. A mysterious connection formed between them, allowing the man to command the rat to spin in circles, which it obediently did. Thus, the rat became the man's familiar. Although vampires are known to create familiars, it was surprising that the man, a mere ghoul, could achieve this, despite the rat's seemingly insignificant appearance. It later played a crucial role in defeating a boss-level Draconid. With Laura's approval, the rat, now named Jerry, was kept in their home for further study. After settling Jerry into his new home, the man, now sleepless due to his undead nature, was invited by Laura for a late-night snack. Over homemade meat soup, they discussed the next day's mission to gather dragon's blood flowers in the Tarascus swamp, home to the boss-level creature Tarascus. Despite the dangers, the man reassured Laura of his immunity to poison and his preparedness with holy water, albeit purchased from a roadside stall. The next day, in the perilous Tarascus swamp, the man encountered an ambush by goblins but managed to fend them off. The wild monsters here were stronger and more tactical than those in the labyrinth, a testament to their fight for survival. After dealing with the goblins, the man continued his search for the dragon's blood flowers. However, a broken bridge and an ensuing attack by a swamp creature tested his resolve. After Jerry jumped aside, he actually started to watch the fight as if he were just a spectator enjoying the show. Soon, the protagonist managed to defeat the monster, and he was quite amused by the situation, wondering if he had inadvertently become the caretaker of a boss. Thus, 2.5 hours passed, and the protagonist encountered the master of this swamp. The holy water, which was supposed to conceal his tracks, had no effect at all. He swore never to buy anything from a roadside stall again. Cornered and with no way out, the protagonist had no choice but to turn around and confront Tarascus head-on. However, whether it was using magic or a powerful move that combined magic with physical strength, nothing seemed to affect Tarascus. Just when the protagonist was out of options, Jerry suddenly charged out. Surprisingly, Jerry activated holy power on his body and then directly charged into the opponent's mouth. But Jerry did not die. Instead, he was spit out by Tarascus, who felt discomfort. Seeing this, the protagonist also realized something unexpectedly. The holy power, which was supposed to be used for healing, revealing it as Tarascus's weakness. The man single-handedly defeated Tarascus, a feat beyond the capability of 10 bronze-level adventurers, showcasing his strength far beyond his current rank. Collecting Tarascus's valuable materials in a pre-prepared spatial bag, the man reflected on his foresight for such encounters, ensuring he was well-equipped for any outcome. The protagonist was ready to fulfill Ellie's commission by collecting a bunch of dragon's blood flowers and returning to the orphanage, which would complete the task perfectly. However, at that moment, a mysterious white-haired man suddenly appeared, prompting the protagonist to become immediately cautious. Given the Tarascus swamp's notorious reputation for its deadly poison fog and dense monster population, not to mention being the domain of the fearsome Draconid, Tarascus, the appearance of this lone figure was highly suspicious, even though Tarascus had been defeated by the protagonist just moments before. To the white-haired man, it was the protagonist who seemed out of place. Noticing the protagonist's wariness, he explained that he was equipped with poison immunity artifacts and holy water to repel Draconids, and that he was there to collect dragon's blood flowers for his master. This explanation eased the protagonist's concerns, and he joined the white-haired man in gathering the flowers. Unexpectedly, upon learning that the protagonist was an adventurer, the stranger directly offered him a commission to regularly collect dragon's blood flowers. The protagonist saw no reason to refuse such a straightforward business proposition, unaware of the significant background of the stranger's master and that this task would mark a turning point for his evolution into a vampire. Upon returning to town in the evening, the protagonist visited the Adventurers Guild to find Zila and arrange for the dissection of the Draconid's corpse. Zila was astounded by the news and inadvertently spoke out loud, prompting the protagonist to urge her to quiet down, as he preferred to keep a low profile among the surrounding adventurers. They prepared to head to the slaughterhouse, where the Draconid's body would be dissected for valuable materials. Although adventurers generally have some knowledge of monster anatomy, professional services are sought for dealing with large creatures like Draconids. The butcher, experienced in dissecting Draconids, was impressed by the well-preserved state of Tarascus, indicating it had been killed in a single strike, leading him to suspect the protagonist might be a silver-ranked adventurer. Even Zila congratulated him on his supposed advancement to silver rank after leaving the slaughterhouse. Though the protagonist knew his increased strength was due to his undead nature, he wondered if returning to human form would mean losing his current power and growth potential, considering his human self lacked any special talents and had struggled for 10 years. The next day, the protagonist went to the orphanage to deliver the task. He handed the dragon's blood flowers to Ellie, and the pharmacist present was amazed by the quality and quantity of the flowers. The protagonist offered the excess flowers for free for them to make medicine for others in need. Before leaving, Ellie once again thanked the protagonist, deeply admiring him and aspiring to become an adventurer who could fight for others just like him. The protagonist suggested that if she wanted to become an adventurer, it would be best to start training in magic as soon as possible. Seeing Ellie's financial constraints, he mentioned that he knew someone who could teach her magic for free, deepening Ellie's affection for him. That evening, Laura learned about everything and was truly exasperated. She knew that with the protagonist being so kind to Ellie, the young girl would undoubtedly develop feelings for him. The next day, upon arriving at the guild, Zila urgently sought out the protagonist and pulled him aside to inquire if he knew anyone from the Raider family, revealing they had specifically requested his services. The protagonist realized the commission from the white-haired stranger was indeed from the Raider family, a powerful and ancient lineage with deep ties to the town and guild. Zila warned him to be cautious with the Raider family's commission, but the protagonist had no intention of refusing. He decided to visit their estate, only to be challenged by a magical maze in their courtyard, a testament to their wealth and eccentricity. Unbeknownst to him, navigating this maze would lead him to acquire a key artifact for his transformation into a vampire.
この迷路を踏破して屋敷にたどり着いた当主様から魔道具を一ついただけるの。
This is a mysterious teapot. The girl first picks up the lid, then pours boiling water into the pot. Strangely, although there are no tea leaves inside the teapot, the poured tea is fragrant and rich. It turns out that this seemingly ordinary teapot is actually a priceless magical artifact. Once it has brewed a type of tea leaf, it can recreate the flavor of that tea countless times without needing to add any more leaves. While this feature might seem somewhat trivial, the girl spent 300 platinum coins to add it to her collection. The man was dumbfounded upon hearing this. A single platinum coin is enough for an ordinary person to live in luxury for a lifetime. This made him realize that the girl's identity was no simple matter. Since entering the Larder family's maze, he had been lost within it, unsure of how long he had wandered. He discovered a courtyard, and the girl sitting inside was the wealthy individual from before. She informed him that this place was not the exit of the maze, but he could rest in the courtyard for a while. Initially, the man thought she was a daughter of the Larder family, but to his surprise, the girl was actually the current head of the Larder family. Even more unexpectedly, she harbored an even more mysterious identity, unknown to the man at the moment. As he brought the cup of tea to his lips, the lower half of his mask disappeared with his will, intriguing the girl about how he acquired the mask. She even offered a hefty sum to buy it. It wasn't that the mask had any special features. The girl's collecting obsession had just kicked in. However, the man, who would have liked to sell it, found that the mask could not be removed, so he had to decline her offer politely. Before leaving, the girl gave him a piece of advice. It's better not to look at the sun. But this was actually a trap. It was only after the man looked at the sun that he realized the maze was filled with countless teleportation circles. Without noticing this, it was impossible to exit the maze. Thus, he wandered until evening, finally solving the maze. Afterward, they went inside the mansion. Larder had promised that anyone who solved the maze could choose a magical artifact from her collection. There are two types of magical artifacts: those produced by the maze and those crafted by humans. The latter are more stable in performance, but with current human technology, only simple constructs like stairway lights can be made. The man then visited the Larder family's treasury, where shelves were filled with neatly organized magical artifacts. To him, this was an unimaginable luxury. From here, he was to choose his reward, which would also be the key artifact for his promotion to a vampire. However, not all artifacts were useful. Some had unclear purposes, like a spherical artifact that would just bounce around when thrown, without any other function. Next, he saw a model of an airship, also a magical artifact. The airships in the western regions were modeled after this prototype. This original airship was essentially a remote-controlled drone that could fly by infusing it with magic. The man was fascinated by this toy and saw it as a potential scouting tool, though it consumed a lot of magic power. Therefore, he didn't make an immediate decision and continued to explore. In an unsorted section of magical artifacts, he encountered various odd artifacts, including a painting that would scare you when a button was pressed. At that moment, the man accidentally touched a magical artifact behind him, causing his magic power to be drained instantly. Larder seemed to know something and urgently instructed Whitehair to find the stop device. What appeared before the man was a giant suit of armor that assembled itself into a golem in a state of rampage. The man managed to disarm the golem by attacking its joints and attempted to destroy the truth rune on its forehead, which was supposed to make itself disassemble. However, he found no such rune and was caught off guard, then thrown away by the golem. The golem's rampage caused a lot of damage to the magical artifacts, but Larder didn't seem to mind. She encouraged the man to continue choosing his reward. They moved to a corner where materials collected from monsters were stored, which could be used to make various medicines or weapons. Among these materials, the man was drawn to a bottle of red liquid. Larder explained it was vampire blood, rumored to turn anyone who drank it into a vampire, though in reality, most who drank it died in madness or became invalids. Despite this, the bottle of blood could sell for a fortune because people still chased after the dream of eternal life. Lorraine was curious about the Larder family's identity, considering them even more generous than the royal family. The airship model wasn't the man's chosen reward, but an extra gift from Whitehair. The man's actual choice was the vampire blood he discovered last. The moment he saw the blood, his subconscious told him that drinking it would definitely bring about some change.
俺の体が欲している。
だがあまりにも危険、命を失うかもしれない。飲まないで済むならそうしてほしい。私としては別にお前がずっとアンデッドでも構う。
ロレーナ。
しかしお前は嫌なのだろ。脳がなかろうと何年かかろうとお前は何が何でないのだろう。ミスリル級。
We can see that after going through the stages of skeleton, ghoul, and corpse demon, the protagonist finally evolves into a vampire. At the last moment of the first season of The Undying Adventurer, it is revealed that the reason the protagonist became an adventurer was to seek revenge on monsters. The premise for evolution is drinking a bottle of vampire blood. However, in reality, most people who drink the blood end up going mad and dying. Caroline knows the protagonist well, even though he is aware of the dangers and lacks talent. She understands that this man she likes will pursue his dream of becoming a mithril-level adventurer no matter what. Caroline is also willing to support the protagonist because this has been his dream since childhood. Suddenly, Caroline remembers a conversation she had with Zhu La about why the protagonist wanted to become a mithril-level adventurer. Caroline didn't want to pry, but her reaction piqued the protagonist's curiosity. He doesn't understand what Caroline wants to ask since she knows everything about him. After some pressing from the protagonist, Caroline finally decides to ask the question. She could never have anticipated his first reaction. This angered Caroline. It turns out that not asking about an adventurer's background and past is an unwritten rule in the adventurer industry, something Caroline learned from the protagonist. As a result, she had never asked him about it over the years, but unexpectedly, the protagonist didn't mind revealing it at all. Seeing that Caroline asked directly, the protagonist slowly began to recount his past. Perhaps it was for revenge, or perhaps he wanted to become someone who could break the cycle of tragedy. The protagonist was born in a small village deep in the borderlands. His father was responsible for procuring supplies for the village. At the age of 5, his parents took him outside the village for the first time. As a child, the protagonist didn't dream of becoming an adventurer. The person who admired adventurers was his childhood friend, Jin Lin. Jin Lin dreamed of traveling the world when she grew up, to see the waterfalls left from the Sky Islands, the water city surrounded by water, and castles like the Sea City Tower that would disappear. Moreover, she wanted to become the Adventure King to protect the protagonist. Compared to Jin Lin's cheerful personality, the protagonist was a timid little boy at the time. Caroline was surprised to hear this. She thought the protagonist had always been adept with a wooden sword and hadn't expected him to have such a personality. The protagonist continued, saying that they safely reached the town. However, the reason everything changed was that they were attacked by monsters on their way back. Jin Lin's grandmother was trapped under the cargo and couldn't move. The protagonist stood by, watching everything unfold, until he saw his parents lying in a pool of blood, which made him burst into tears. The culprit behind their attack was a giant wolf-like monster. Jin Lin was brave and didn't get scared by the giant wolf. She immediately pulled the protagonist to run away. The two 5-year-old children could only run forward non-stop, but how could they possibly outrun a monster? After exhausting all their strength and thinking they had reached a safe place, they saw the giant wolf's figure again and realized it was just toying with them. However, the giant wolf had grown tired of playing and decided to finish off its prey. At that critical moment, Jin Lin pushed the protagonist away and took the wolf's claws herself, all because of a promise they had made earlier.
不足したから守るって強くなって
下がってくれこいつは俺が何とかするまだやる気か
After repelling the giant wolf, an adventurer took the corpse and the protagonist back to the village. Since then, the protagonist swung Jin Lin's wooden sword every day until he stopped when the white-haired adventurer appeared. He asked how to become an adventurer, perhaps to avenge his parents and friends, or maybe because it was Jin Lin's dream. The white-haired adventurer didn't dismiss the 5-year-old boy's question and detailed how to become an adventurer. Practice martial arts and knowledge before the age of 15. Then learn about herbs and magic, as well as survival skills in the wild. Although mastering these skills doesn't guarantee strength, what comes next depends on how hard you work. He also told the protagonist to remember one thing. My name is Wilfred. I am a mithril-level adventurer. Come find me after you become an adventurer. The protagonist now understands what Wilfred meant by telling him so much. Perhaps he wanted to give him a goal. After all, without a goal, that 5-year-old boy might have died from a lack of will to live. The protagonist's current kind-hearted nature is also influenced by Wilfred. Caroline couldn't help but marvel at whether the protagonist was lucky or unlucky to have been saved by a mithril-level adventurer. A chance as rare as encountering a dragon. But indeed, the protagonist had experienced both. First being saved, then swallowed by a dragon. Is this what they call a chosen one? The protagonist also states that one day, he will definitely defeat that giant wolf monster and become a mithril-level adventurer like Wilfred. For this, he trained in the village for 10 years and spent another decade in this town. Although he is afraid of death, if he gives up, living would be no different from being dead to him. After drinking the blood, the protagonist showed no reaction at first, which made Caroline relieved, thinking the blood might be fake. The next second, the protagonist suddenly underwent a transformation, experiencing intense pain that made him vomit a large amount of blood and scream loudly as his consciousness became blurry. Inside his consciousness, he felt his entire body being remodeled, and he was certain that if this continued, he would become a mindless monster. Dozens of days later, the protagonist woke up in his consciousness, and his first thought was to sleep a bit more. Since becoming a monster, he hadn't felt the desire to sleep for a long time. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Caroline sitting by the bed with a book, saying she was reading a record book on vampire ecology. ghoul, lower vampire, middle vampire, upper vampire. As their strength increases, sightings of them decrease, although it's unclear which level the protagonist is at. He has become a vampire. Then, Caroline asked the protagonist to take off his shirt, revealing a pair of black wings on his back. The protagonist discovered that the wings could shrink with his will, which was fortunate since it meant he could go out without others seeing them. Caroline said they would talk about the wings later and then asked the protagonist to show his face. His mouth had returned to a human appearance, with two small fangs on his teeth. His eyes had turned red, a characteristic of vampires, but there are humans with red eyes, so this wouldn't necessarily expose him. Hearing Caroline say this, the protagonist felt relieved.
なんだか懐かしい顔だな。おかえり、レッドファイナ。
あ、ただいま。
すまんな、付き合わせて。
気にするな、世話になってる礼だ。
そういえばお前、ビルフリートに会いに行ったのか？
何度か探してみたんだけど、にはいない気がする。でも今は行けるんだよな、あの人に会いに。